Hello again, you sick, twisted weather freaks. Welcome to another fun-filled, action-packed, and intellectually stimulating edition of This Week of Weather. I am your host and meteorologist, DT, from weatherrisk.com, your commander of chaos, your colonel of confusion, your captain of catastrophe. Let's talk about this week in weather. And we begin by reminding you first about Weather Risk itself. There's the website, the different products we have here on the shop page, including the 3-week newsletter, which goes out after 3 weeks. And as we leave the winter season in eastern North America, eastern U.S., our focus now becomes, of course, on the agricultural business and, of course, your 3 weeks, your weekends, trying to get them planned correctly. It's looking like a pretty wet spring coming up here for the eastern U.S. So if you have a lot of plans this spring coming up into the summer, the 3-week newsletter is also a really good bargain. It's only $5 a month, and like I said, you can get it here on the shop page. All right, this is the Twitter page, the snowstorm page, and this here is the same thing, but this is Threads, in case you don't like using Twitter. And of course, this is the Weather Risk Grain weather page, which is for our grain trading business as well. And then this, of course, is the Facebook page, as always. All right, let's take a look and see what's going on. So this is from Wednesday evening. There's the big trough in the Gulf of Alaska extending down to, into the eastern Pacific. This is a big, big player here. This trough here, which is what brought the cold front through in the rain yesterday, it ended the heat, that originally also came from the Pacific Northwest and the Gulf of Alaska. So these troughs are swinging through like this, and when they drop down, they cause the ridge to warm up, and we get a warm spell, and the cold fronts come through, the troughs swing through, and we get our cold shots. There's the heat ridge, there's the warm pattern we had, and now it's out in the Northwest Atlantic and in Southeast Canada. Now, to the south, we have this upper low, which was a very big system a few days ago off the Southern California coast and the Eastern Pacific. But as it's moved eastward into Southern California, North Baja, Northwest Mexico, Arizona, it has weakened quite a bit. All right, taking a look at a progression of events here. This here is 36 hours. Oops, let me bring it forward here. And you can see, so the California low now moves into the central and lower plains, into Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, some rain here. The big trough is gone. We get a little bit of a ridge ahead of it, so we warm up again in the eastern United States. But look at this monster trough here. There's an upper low off the coast of British Columbia, and the trough extends all the way down to the eastern Pacific. Now, by the time we get to Saturday, this low now is weakening, as you can see, but it's still a disturbance here in the jet stream. You see how the lines are all bent here, right? Let me see if I can pull this up a little larger so you can see a little bit. All right. There you go. And you can see, bring the arrow back. You can see there's the system right here. The line's a little weak here. Now the big ridge is warming up, so we have a lot of warm air ahead of this system here. We're getting some blocking in eastern Greenland and Iceland, and the trough is very, very big on the east coast. It's now moving in, to the west coast. You can now see the upper low is off the Vancouver Island, British Columbia, and this huge trough is going to be ejecting low pressure areas. There's one, there's another one in the jet stream coming eastward through the Rockies. All right, now we get to, this is now on Sunday evening, Monday, in the upper left, and then we have Tuesday in the bottom right. So there's the trough here. I'm trying to bring the rain, the next disturbance in the jet stream. So this is the previous one here. So after this one is gone and brings the rain this weekend to the southeast states, the Tennessee Valley, and Mid-Atlantic, this system will be coming east, this low right here. And that's exactly what we see here. So it advances very quickly in the southern jet stream. Big ridge here to the north, keeping this system weak. This low, when it tries to come up, is run up against the ridge, it'll weaken and fall apart. Meanwhile, look at this monster trough here, still battering the Pacific Northwest, the West Coast, the Rockies, British Columbia, a lot of precipitation, a lot of cold temperatures here. Now, eventually, when we get to day 5 here, so you can see it. This upper low now rotates. You see how the system is going to swing where the G and the H here, right? It's going to swing up this way towards Manitoba. That's what we have here. So this is now shaped. Here it's northwest to southeast. Now it's running west to east. You see that? Now that's going to result in a big low coming out of Colorado, which is going to track. This big low here is going to track up into Minnesota, then up into Manitoba here as a blizzard. A real blizzard for the Canadians, and they need the snow there. They've had a way below normal snowfall, a lot of days with no snow on the ground. So this is going to be a nice blizzard for the Canadian prairies. Meanwhile, the western trough will continue to eject pieces of energy, what we call short waves, little disturbances in the jet stream. And these are low pressure areas, which will bring rain. And there's a huge ridge on the eastern United States. So you can see by next week, everybody east of Mississippi is going to blow torch. It's going to get really warm. I mean, really warm. And this is a really strong warm pattern here. On top of that, we have an upper low all to the south of Greenland in the North Atlantic, which is blocking this ridge from moving out to sea. Meanwhile, all the energy from the Pacific is still coming in. Another big trough here in the eastern Pacific. This is going to follow this, which is going to follow this, which is going to follow this, and so on and so forth. All right. To take a look what I'm talking about here operationally, this is now a Saturday. There's the rain for the southeastern states, the Tennessee Valley, Mid-Atlantic. Okay, southeast winds feeding the moisture in, so it's a mild rain event. Okay, now the front lingers, it finally falls apart here Sunday night, Monday. There's the blizzard for the upper plains. Let me see if you can blow this up for you a little bit. Yep, there it is. Very powerful system here. This is a blizzard for Manitoba and for Saskatchewan. Cold air coming in behind it. Meanwhile, we still have this lingering trough here on the East Coast. Temperatures, look at the change. Okay, this is right now. Thursday into Friday temperatures. These are surface temperatures below normal. You can see everybody east of the Mississippi is quite chilly relative to normal. And then by the time we get to day 4 and day 5, when this monster ridge shows up, look at the anomalies here. Wow. Not too shabby, Abby. That's pretty darn impressive. Now, again, you want to notice that the anomalies are not that great down in the southern states because naturally, as you get into March, temperatures are warming up very quickly in Alabama, the Carolinas, into Tennessee, southern Virginia. But to the north, the Great Lakes, New England, it's still usually cold this time of year. Same thing with Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois. So warm air masses cause a much bigger temperature anomalies there. Now, as we go into the 6 to 10 day, we still have the polar vortexes weakening here, as you can see. Okay, these are the different projections. This is the average here for March, as you can see. And these lines represent a weakening of the polar vortex, no doubt about that. And you can see that here, the valley is going down. Okay, so and that reaches a peak around the middle of March and then begins to come back up again. Now that's the GFS. The European is showing the same sort of thing. It plunges here over the next week, early March, okay? Then it's below its negative values right through until I guess March 20th, something like that, and then you can see it warms up very nicely. Okay, so and comes to an end. Now, what are we saying here? This is what, in other words, the winds here are breaking down. These represent winds. So see, this calls winds, all right? The winds here at the top of the atmosphere are breaking down. That means the polar vortex gets weak or it can get elongated or stretched, which means you can get colder air intrusions and possible significant storms if the other features in the jet stream show that, all right? So this is just a general favorability for the Arctic oscillation to go negative. The polar vortex to become weak, the Arctic oscillation to become negative, which means bigger intrusions of cold air sometime around the middle of March. And if we look at the Atlantic pattern here, we can see this is the Atlantic from the East Coast over to Europe. And the reason why I'm pointing this out here is this is the positive NAO, which we don't like if you want to see something happening on the East Coast in March. Notice it gets a little indication of it here in mid-March. The red represents blocking in the jet stream. That might be in Greenland or in Quebec or what have you, just general blocking. The green is negative NAO. So again, the red and the green together represents a fairly strong signal that the pattern remains convoluted as we go into March and then into April. And the purple color is the Atlantic thumb ridge, which is not good for the East Coast at all. And then finally, it gets, like I said, and the gray is no signal, no discernible pattern whatsoever. So early on here, right through March 10th or 12th, we have a strong blocking signal right through here. Then the pattern begins to shift, and we keep some kind of blocking pattern of some type through the end of March into early April. And then we'll see what happens. So there's a little weakness right here, and then it begins, again, a fairly strong signal for blocking in the Atlantic Ocean and in Greenland and that sort of thing. If we look at our teleconnections, okay, so this is for North America. Now, this is for the Atlantic. This is for North America. So we have two signals or teleconnections on the West Coast. The Eastern Pacific Oscillation, which is the Alaskan Ridge or Alaskan Trough, and the P&A, which is the West Coast Ridge or the West Coast Trough. All right. And then on the Atlantic side, we have the Arctic Oscillation, which goes positive or negative. depending whether the polar vortex is strong or weak. And then the NAO, which is the Greenland block when it's negative, and the Greenland low when it's positive. And of course, these are different combinations on the Atlantic side and then on the Pacific side, all these different possible combinations, P&A and the EPO. So let's take a look at the Atlantic. This is the Arctic Oscillation. Here we are right now, as you can see, February 28th. Now, this is where we were generally positive, and that makes sense given the mild pattern we've had for late February, it's most of February. Now, these different model projections show the Arctic Oscillation dropping towards neutral by March 2nd, and then a little on the negative side by March 6th or 7th or 8th, and generally running close to neutral or slightly negative right through the middle of the month. The NAO, which is, the Greenland feature, here we are positive, and we keep it positive till March 2nd, and then it drops towards neutral and then negative. All the values are negative through the middle of the month, which represents the possible Greenland block forming, and indeed we'll see that on the models. All right, now let's take a look at the Pacific side, the EPO and the P&A. Okay, on the Pacific side, the Eastern Pacific Oscillation, the Alaskan Ridge. So here we are right now, where black dots, we're kind of neutral. We go positive, and then it generally drifts towards neutral through the rest of the first week of March, almost to March 15th. Some of the models are a little below, some are a little above, so it's about neutral. All right? Now, again, what you want to see for late season cold is the EPO to be strongly negative, and we're not seeing that. And then here is the P&A pattern on the West Coast. This is the West Coast ridge, or West Coast trough. And here, again, we can see that we were positive. Now we're dropped towards negative with all the energy coming into the West Coast, all that storminess, right? This, obviously, that's going negative. This makes sense, giving this kind of pattern with this huge trough here. This is driving the P&A negative. So that makes sense. And then all the models keep it strongly positive, towards neutral a little bit by middle of March, but still mainly negative, which means that there's a lot of energy coming into the West Coast, and we're going to keep the trough there. There's going to be no ridge on the West Coast of North America. None. Okay. Now we'll take a look at the MJO. Here on the MJO, you can see that once again, they're saying, I posted this the other day, but I wanted to bring it forward again. Notice here, this is the European, the GFS. So the red line's the next 5 days, then the blue line, 6 to 10 day, and the purple line's 11 to 15 day and beyond. You can see that we go into phase 4, phase 5, phase 6, both the GFS and the European. It's fairly strong, the signal is fairly strong here, but look what happens once again when it gets into phase 7, it turns into the neutral circle or it stalls. It will not go into phase 8 or phase 1. It won't. We saw this in December, we saw this in mid-February. It looked like we might go stormy mid-February on the East Coast. No, all the models which had the MJO going to phase 8 and 1 changed their mind, and they turned it into neutral circle. It never got into phase 8. And that's exactly what we're seeing here again. For whatever reason, this winter into the early spring, the MJO will not go into phase 8 or phase 1. It simply won't do it. It's very interesting. I'm not sure why that's happening, but it's really interesting. Now, if we take a look at these different signals here, we take a look at these different signals. Remember, phase 4, phase 5, and phase 6. This takes us till the end of March. So what does that look like? Okay. Well, this is phase 4, as you can see right here. And generally, oops, that's not quite the right one here. So let's go with there it is, phase 4. That's what we're going to look at here. So this is phase 4 in a month of March with El Nino. So if we, let me bring this forward. So you can see here the pattern: trough on the Eastern Pacific, a ridge in Texas and the lower plains, and then one in the Atlantic Ocean, a big trough in Eastern Canada, Great Lakes, and New England. And as a result, your temperatures underneath the ridge here are pretty warm, right? And then they're pretty close to neutral in the Eastern United States with this kind of pattern here. A shallow trough on the East Coast. And the rainfall, well, it's kind of wet on the deep south and in New England, but other than that, no strong signal one way or the other when it's in phase 4 for the eastern U.S. Now in phase 5, here we go. Now here we have this big confluence zone. So we have a big upper-low negative anomaly in Quebec, Canada, Hudson's Bay, and a ridge over the eastern United States. So that produces a cold pattern right along the U.S.-Canada border, but to the south, it's close to normal. And this represents a stormy pattern between these two jet streams, and that shows up here in the Midwest. Now, underneath the ridge in the eastern United States, the mid-Atlantic, it's dry in Kentucky, Tennessee, the Carolinas, Virginia, Pennsylvania, up to New England. But the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, it's a pretty stormy pattern. And then here, this is phase 6. Again, going here into phase 6, what does that look like at the end of the month? That's pretty warm. Look at the warm signal here. Wow. Now, why? Because, well, you can see it. Enormous anomaly here in the Midwest, eastern United States. And with the jet stream coming in from the west coast, and these sort of upper low here in the eastern Pacific and one in Texas, this is a very wet pattern for the Midwest as well. Not so much the east coast underneath the ridge, but it's warm and dry. But the west of the Appalachians, this is a pretty wet and warm pattern here. So what this is saying, if you want to get into your garden, you want to start planting stuff, if you want to start your agricultural concerns, once we get into phase 5 and phase 6, things really look pretty good on the East Coast. It looks fairly dry, and it looks pretty warm. Okay, let's take a look at our models here in the 6 to 10 day. All right, so the energy of the West Coast remains. Here's these impulses coming through the West Coast trough in the Eastern Pacific, right? And there's the ridge holding in place. Okay, it's a very active pattern. Boom, bada bing. The system's coming right through. Now this that is the operational European 168 hours. So here's the European ensemble. So the trough is again right on the west coast, right here. Now here the European is a little far to the west with the trough. It's more like on the west coast. And again, there's your mean trough sending the energy, these systems into the ridge where it's kind of wet. You could see cold fronts stalling in this kind of pattern against this huge ridge in southeast Canada and the northwest Atlantic Ocean. Now, the GFS is showing the same sort of thing. Again, the trough is on the west coast here, just like the European ensemble. So I think the GFS here is pretty good. I think the GFS ensemble, the European, and the GFS in green here agree, so I think that's right. And then you can see the strong ridge in New England and southeast Canada, and these troughs trying to drive low pressure into the Ohio Valley on the east coast and bring in some rain, especially the Midwest, not so much the east coast. And I'll show you what I mean. This is the European model here. Now, this is for Wednesday, March 6th. The big rain in the deep south and the Ohio Valley, Midwest. And then some rain. Eventually, the system gets to the east coast, and it kind of lingers here because of this big ridge blocking it. So the cold front stalls against this enormous ridge. And that's exactly what happened in Europe. Look at the rain here. Okay, east of the front is quite warm. Behind the front, it's cold. A lot of rain here. Look at this. That's a lot of heavy rain here for next March 6th and 7th on the European. Now, behind the front, pretty cold from Canada in the Great Lakes here, seasonally cold for this time of year. Nothing extreme, but seasonally cold. The GFS is sort of agreeing with this idea. It has the front here, okay, and then it has a second wave developing on the front. This is the 12Z GFS here. You can see a second wave on Thursday into Friday. So a little later, not quite Thursday, it's 24 hours later, but it's the same general idea. Okay. And then here we go to day 10. Now this gets interesting because now all this ridging here, this warm air begins to build towards Greenland. As the trough continues to push these systems in, it forces the ridging to the north, begins to build and towards Greenland and Baffin Island and Labrador and Quebec. You can see it's building and building and building. And eventually, by day 10, we have a negative NAL here of some type. A block in Greenland, negative NAL. Now, we still don't have any ridging on the west coast. You see the trough? It won't go away. So these low pressure areas come in, but there's no cold air. There's very little cold air in these patterns. This is the European ensemble, and this is the GFS. They're both valid for March 9th. See that? So the short wave is very potent. That's a nice looking system. That's going to produce a nice area of low pressure, but there's no cold air to work with. This is all Pacific air. Look at the flow here. There's simply no cold air here. This is all Pacific air. So the block is nice to have, but it's not enough this time of year. In mid-March, it's just not enough. Now, the GFS being the GFS, there's the low here on March 9th, okay? The high to the north, it wants to bring snow inland to the mountains. All right, maybe. I'm not going to rule it out. I'm very skeptical of it. The low jumps to the coast, and you get this nice Appalachian snowstorm here on the GFS. I think this is BS. I don't think it's likely at all, and it's certainly not likely given the MJO. At this point, according to the MJO, we're going to be March 9th. We're going to be in phase 4, which is, let me see, that is this map here. So, it might happen for the interior of the mountains. I can't rule it out. It's a possibility. And then, like I said, that is, this is that system. And the other point I wanted to make here, if you look at the ensemble, now this is the GFS ensemble for March 10th. So there's the low. Okay, there's our negative NAO, very nice. But there's the West Coast trough, all Pacific energy, racing inland, mild Pacific air, no cold air. The polar vortex is way, way far to the north. The thing is here, you don't get a lot of support for this. This is a very strong signal on the GFS ensemble, right? But you don't get any support for it. Okay, all the lows are scattered all about here. Now the European looks different. The European has a system here in the plains of the Midwest on March 9th to 10th. It's got nothing on the East Coast, and the European ensemble looks like the operational run. See the lows here? Looks like this. So we have this solution. All right, this is the 12Z GFS updated run. Okay, it's got the low further north, and again, inland snows, interior New England, northern New York State. Again, this is possible. I don't think it's likely, but it doesn't have any support. It just doesn't from the ensemble. Meanwhile, the European does. So I'm kind of favoring the European here, folks. I got to tell you. All right. In the 6 to 10 day, look at these temperatures. Look how warm it's going to be. Again, very impressive warmth here. That makes it also hard to believe that this snowstorm scenario is going to show up, okay, given the warmth. So I think this is bullshit. I just don't think it's right. I think the European solution is correct. Okay, and then 11 to 15 day, you can see the NAO remains in place, both these models, but again, so does the West Coast trough. It doesn't go anywhere. So what this means is that low pressure areas get ejected from the West Coast, Eastern Pacific, into the Rockies, the plains, the Midwest, tracking in a more or less west-east direction, passing underneath the block, which keeps the pattern wet, okay? And the 11 to 15 day, it's a cooler pattern because you're getting all these low pressure areas with rain, cool temperatures, and then to the north, it's a little above normal, but not as warm as it has been. And you're getting a lot of rain, these kinds of patterns here. That's what this looks like to me. This is fairly wet 11 to 15 day. That's what it looks like to me. So I don't really see a winter pattern. Look where the polar vortex is. This is way the hell up on the north slope of Alaska. That is not good. It just is not. So anyway, it looks like a wet and cool here mid-March from what I can see, maybe going into the end of March. And then the end of March, we might warm up a lot. So we'll see if that works out. All right, that's the forecast. This is meteorologist DT from Weather Risk. I guess I will see you over on the Facebook page, then over on the Twitter page, and over on the website.